ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. On behalf of Indian Institute of World Culture, the Mythic Society, Mission Disha and Pragna Pravaha, a very warm welcome for today's lecture, Faces of India, Names of Bharat. So, welcome you all. And we have with us Dr. Koenraad Elst today to provide the lecture. So, very hearty welcome, sir, to this particular lecture. So I request Pradeep Bharadwaj of Pragna Pravaha to offer a bouquet to Dr. Elst.
Yeah, but don't put it in the way of the camera.
So post the lecture we will have time for question and answers. So people who wish to ask or post questions can do so. So before we start the lecture, I would like to give a brief introduction of Dr. Koenraad. So Dr. Elst obtained his doctorate in Oriental Philology and History from the Catholic University of Leuven, Belgium in 1998. Based on his MA degrees in Sinology, Indo-Iranian Studies and Philosophy and a research stay at Banaras Hindu University. He worked mostly as a foreign desk journalist and served as foreign policy assistant in the Belgium Senate. Dr. Elst is presently affiliated to the Sanchi University of Buddhist and Indic Studies and occasionally teaches at the Indus University Ahmedabad as well as the private Indology Academy in Houston. He is the chairman of the Ram Swarup and Sitaram Goyal Memorial Fund, Delhi. He has authored more than a dozen peer-reviewed papers, co-authored several books, contributed to a dozen more of the books, and authored 18 English and 8 Dutch books of his own. He has participated in numerous academic and other conferences and organized several of them too. His publications mainly concern divergent aspects of the subcontinent's interreligious situation, Indo-European studies, the fundamental questions of religious thought, democracy, and language policy in both the European Union and India. He has also studied aspects of Taoism and taken part in many short retreats. So as I have already mentioned, today's lecture will be on Faces of India and Names of Bharat. So just before starting here, so this was my first introduction to Dr. Elst, and I was asking him how many times he has been there in India. So he has stayed in India several times, and this is his 41st visit to India. So on that count, so I once again warmly welcome Dr. Elst, and over to you, sir.
Yes. Okay. So I kept you waiting rather long. Oh yeah, this apparently, I think the technical team has to put this somewhere, somewhere on my clothes or so. You know best. Okay. Because there is actually a word I don't know in English. I'm now looking it up. And this is to explain why I am late. So I am late because I noticed that it's the deadline for sending in an abstract to a conference of Orientalists in Belgium sometime in spring, and they wanted me to talk about something in India that all the others are going to talk about as it applies to China and Arabia and so on. So this is going to be about Now the word is coming. Oh yes, patronage. The French word was mécénat, and yes, patronage means that a rich man, a money bag, sponsors the production of the arts. And so the very first case of patronage, I mean, normally it's a subject I don't know anything at all about, but here I realize that there is a very important case of patronage that I do know about, namely the Vedic rishis. They were sponsored, and so they wrote Dana Stutis, which means a poem in praise of the sponsors, right? So I just wrote that I'd like to talk about that. Anyway, so here we are. In summer of this year, there was very briefly some commotion over the government's announcement of some event presided over by the President of India, namely Draupadi Murmu, but she was announced to many people's surprise as the President of Bhārata. Now, according to the Constitution, the terms India and Bharat are equivalent, so there's nothing wrong, nothing, illegal or unconstitutional about it. But still, people didn't like it, and of course they very, very correctly saw it as a jibe, a sort of stab at the opposition with their India alliance. So this is an abbreviation for the what is it? The National Alliance for Inclusion and Diversity. Yeah, right. The Indian National Inclusion and India. No, it's Democracy and Inclusion Alliance. I mean, not I'm having trouble finding what the word stands for. Because everybody also doesn't know what it stands for. The only thing that counted is that together the words make up India. And so the opposition's intention was to pit the BJP against India. And so BJP is bad for India, we are India. And so the BJP, rather than countering that and saying, no, this is not true, they jocularly said, okay, well, you India, we Bharat. Well, okay, so then a little discussion ensued, not very long, not very deep. And I'll give you a reason why it could have been long and deep. But okay, in this case, you see, nobody took it very seriously because after all, the word Bharat is already in the Constitution. Nothing that new about it. And there's nothing against the word Bharat. I mean, those who say that Narendra Modi is a Hindu communalist and so on, at least they can't extend that to the word Bharat. Well, maybe not. So let's see what the names of India or Bharat are. So the word India, as you certainly all know, is a Persian pronunciation of Sindhu. Sindhu meaning the Indus River, presently mostly in Pakistan, also a little bit in Kashmir and in Tibet. And so that's just a geographical term. You know, the virtue of this term for the secularists is that it's secular. It's only about a river. You can't get more material than that. So, okay, India is called the river country. And so for the Persians, it meant the people living in the Indus Valley or beyond. And in Persian, the form is Hindu. Sindhu becomes Hindu. And then the word is taken over in Arabic as Hind. Actually, the Arabic term is Hindu, if you properly pronounce it. You see, in colloquial Arabic, you don't pronounce the case endings. I mean, I guess you know what case endings are. Like Asya, and so on in Sanskrit. So you have the nominative, the genitive, and the accusative case in Arabic. And the nominative case ends in U. So actually, the word Hindu is adopted from Persian in its identical form, Hindu. But in colloquial Arabic, this last sound is not pronounced, that becomes Hind. When Subhas Bose had his army of independent India, he used as a slogan Jai Hind. And Nehru very gladly took this over. I mean, he didn't want to have much to do with Subhas Bose, but that slogan came in handy because it was not at all Hindu. Even though the words sound a bit similar, we're not at all Hindu. It was Arabic. You know, you can't get more Islamic than that. But in fact, in proper Arabic writing, you would say Jai Hindu. Now, I don't know if Nehru would have liked that one. Then in Chinese, it was taken over as Intu. It's still the name of India. Why? Because in Persian, it simply meant the country India. It had no religious coloring. You know, anyone who lived on or beyond the Indus River was a Hindu. Then it was also taken over in Greek and in Latin, and so there the initial aspiration also fell away, so it became India. So it's not a colonial term. You see many Hindu chauvinists say, oh no, we have to get rid of India because it's colonial. No, you see, it predated colonialism by a very long margin. So the term India, there's nothing wrong with it, except that it has been captured by the opposition. So maybe let's think about Bhārata. But let's first consider a few alternatives that equally have the virtue of being secular. You know, that's the highest good we can aspire to, secularism. So, there is a very old Hindu term for India which is very secular. It is Jambu Dvipa. Now, Dvipa means an island, or more generally a landmass. A continent that is surrounded by oceans is also an island, strictly speaking. And so Jambu Dvipa means the Indian subcontinent. So the Dvipa is the landmass, and Jambu is a kind of blackberry. Not identical to the European blackberry, but that gives an idea. It's, again, a purely secular term. It's named after a fruit. So that could also be acceptable. Of course, nowadays, there's a bit of a problem that since the partition, you know, South Asia or the subcontinent also contains the states of Pakistan and Bangladesh. Not that that has to be a serious obstacle, because of course Hindus know that these states are just intermezzos. They are an accident of history. So temporarily, circumstances have forced the Indian population to accept a partition, but this will be undone at some point anyway. You know, Russia has had to take the Crimea Peninsula back by force. I am rather optimistic that India will not need force to reintegrate Pakistan and Bangladesh. In fact, the harder nut to crack will be Bangladesh, because Pakistan is very much on the way to disintegration. You know, it will fall into your lap like a ripe fruit. About Jambu Dweep, a question that is sometimes asked of me. You know, a very typical Indian animal is the elephant. And so some people wonder, this Jambu Dweep, could that be the origin of the English word jumbo, as in jumbo jet? You know, a giant airplane, an elephant-like airplane. Now here, this is just a sideshow, it's not important, but anyway, I'll clarify this. No, unfortunately not. This has nothing to do with India. The word comes from a circus elephant in 19th century Europe, imported from Africa. And the name given to it was in fact an African word for somewhere in West Africa, taken over by the French, which meant an idol, you know, a fetish, you know, a religious statue to which all kinds of magical powers are ascribed. It was used, that I've only read, I'm not sure of it, but it said that the use of it was to scare women into obedience. So men knew the secret that this was only, you know, a game, but women were supposed to fall for it and be scared by it. Anyway, so, you know, this jumbo, you know, jumbo is of African origin. That has nothing to do with India, though it would have been nice. Then we have another word, which is Hindustan. Now, Hindustan simply is Hindu plus the geographical term stan in Persian, which is almost synonymous with stan in Sanskrit, like in Rajasthan, and with the same meaning. So it simply means the Indian domain, the Indian country. And so it essentially continues the geographical meaning of Hindu. Now, interestingly, this word Hindustan kept its strictly geographical meaning after the word Hindu had acquired a religious meaning. That is to say, you see, the word Hindu didn't exist in ancient Sanskrit. I know that there are some, you know, some chauvinists who insist that it's really a Sanskrit word. Well, sorry, it isn't. And so they claim that it always had the same meaning as today, so it already existed and it had the same meaning as today. Well, no, you see, Sanskrit doesn't have this word. In Persian, it also retained the original geographical meaning. However, when the Islamic invaders came into India, they brought the word, and the day they entered India, it acquired a religious meaning. Why? Soon enough there were Indian Muslims. I mean, what the conquerors did was to rape the local women and so on. And sometimes they never saw the child again. But sometimes this was like a woman they bought as a slave or something that was inside their household. The kid was raised as a Muslim, but it was 50% Indian in blood, and its children were 75% Indian in blood and so on, but they were Muslim. So soon there were Indian Muslims. And what the word Hindu did from then on was to differentiate between Indian Muslims and all other Indians. So the word Hindu came to mean any Indian who is not a Muslim. So whatever Mohan Bhagavat might say that all Indians are Hindus, you see, the historical fact denies that. By definition, a Hindu means a non-Muslim Indian. Then over the centuries it was refined because they discovered there were also Christians in India. There were even already Muslims in India, in Kerala, because there had been Arab settlements already for centuries. And then when in Arabia Islam came into vogue, then they converted to Islam also in Kerala. But so it was refined, and and right now the real meaning is any Indian pagan, any Indian unbeliever, or more practical, any Indian who goes to hell. This is a very practical thing to know, because all the ink and saliva and so on spent on discussing are Buddhists Hindus, are Sikhs Hindus, are tribals Hindus and so on, they're all totally useless, because in the definition itself you find the answer to all these questions. Yes, of course, you see, Buddhists are not Muslims, and if they're Indian, well, then they're Hindu. You may, whether you can say that about Japanese Buddhists, that's a different matter, but about Indian Buddhists, you can definitely say they are Hindus. The Buddha was a Hindu. The Sikhs didn't exist yet when the Muslim invasions took place. But already to them the definition applies. You see, they're not Muslims, well, then they're Hindus. Now, the word Hindu has a very broad definition. Like the tribals, who have never heard of the Vedas, are still Hindus. So, a common idea has established itself among Hindus that Hindu means Vedic. And that, like, for instance, there is this American Hindu convert, Frank Morales, who has written a book about this, and so he says that every religion is defined by a book, Islam by the Quran, Christianity by the Bible, and Hinduism by the Vedas. Now that's absolutely misconceived. First of all, Hinduism or even Vedism is not a religion like Christianity or Islam. Hinduism existed before the Vedas. Would you say that Bhāratvāj, the rishi who wrote the oldest suktas, the oldest Vedic hymns, would you call him a Hindu? He didn't have the Vedas yet. And he even wrote hymns older than the Gayatri Mantra. He couldn't start his Sandhya Vandana with reciting the Gayatri. It didn't exist yet. Okay, was he a Hindu? So I think he was, according to this definition, he definitely was. And Hindus exist ever since there are human beings in India. Which, according to some, may be very long. I read some book about the evolution theory by the ISKCON, by the Hare Krishnas. And so they're different from Christian creationists, who say that there was no evolution and so on. No, according to the Hare Krishnas, the world is not 6,000 years old. It's millions, billions of years old. But the difference with the evolutionists is that there were always human beings. You see, Rama lived 1 million years ago, and all the other avatars, even longer. So, these comic strips where you have human beings living at the time of the dinosaurs. You see, where they imagine the caveman, running between the legs of a brontosaur. And so the Hare Krishnas think that that is literally true. So in that case, if it was in India, they were Hindus, 100 million years ago. Now, I don't say that. But at any rate, when human beings settled in India, I don't know, 100,000 years ago or so, they were Hindus by definition. And so the tribals are Hindus, the Jains are Hindus, even though they're not really Vedic. Some textbooks in school say that, Jainism was a revolt against the, authoritarian rule of the Vedic Brahmins and so on. That's all absolute nonsense. But the Jain tradition did grow outside the Vedas. And maybe even earlier than the Vedas, we don't know. We have historically we have the last two Jain Tirthankaras, Mahavira, and then before him, like 200 years before, Parshvanath. And then they say that there are 22 earlier Tirthankaras. Now that I don't know. They've not been dug up or anything. They have left us no writings. So that we have to take on faith. But at any rate, there is much in that tradition that is not traceable to the Vedas. In Buddhism, it's much less so. You see, Buddhism clearly grew in a society where the Vedic culture was an established background. And so the Buddha himself didn't preach in Sanskrit. He used the popular language, which was still very close to Sanskrit, namely Pali. But he was like a well-educated young man in other societies. Like, I've learned Latin in school. I can still read Latin texts, sometimes with the help of a dictionary. And I understand Latin maxims. But to actually go preach in Latin, now that I wouldn't do. And I don't think that my audience would understand me, so it's pretty useless. So similarly, the Buddha knew some Sanskrit. Actually, Professor Richard Gombrich from Oxford has identified a number of passages in the Buddha's sermons where he quotes the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So you see, this was part of his education. This is something that he could constantly refer to. Nevertheless, this area, which is present-day Bihar, that had its own culture, it was non-Vedic. The Vedic culture was located in Haryana. And so you can't identify Hindu with Vedic. The role of the Vedas in Hinduism can be explained more or less as follows. So there is a tradition that starts in Haryana, in a small part of Haryana. So the initial state where it started was the realm of the Paurava tribe. So you have the in Hindu tradition, you have the ancestor, the patriarch Manu. He has, I think, 10 children, of whom most of whom we don't know anything about. But the two important ones are the second one, who is a son, Ikshvaku, who starts the solar dynasty, to which Rama belonged, and the Buddha belonged, and Mahavira Jina belonged. And then the eldest, who is a girl and therefore not entitled to succeeding to the throne, Ila, and so she moves out. Perhaps, I mean, according to the later Puranas, it is to what is now Prayagraj, Allahabad. But that may be a transposition, maybe originally in real history, at which the Puranas are not very good, was also in the Haryana area. This I will leave open. In fact, your own fellow city dweller Jijit Nadumuri Ravi has just published a book in which he makes that argument that a number of more eastern cities like Ayodhya were originally located in the Saraswati basin in Haryana. Anyway, that's an open discussion that's ongoing. But so this Ila has a son Pururavas, and so he starts the lunar dynasty. That lunar dynasty then moves to the Vedic area, northern Haryana. After so many generations, you have a certain Yayati who has 5 sons. One of the sons is Puru. He founds the Paurava tribe. And so within the Paurava tribe emerges the Vedic tradition. And so originally the Vedic tradition is not pan-Indian, is not pan-Hindu, it's just the tradition of the Paurava tribe. And when the word Arya is used in there, you see many people against the Aryan invasion theory insist that Aryan has no ethnic meaning. That is true for most of Indian history, but not for the Vedic period. There it clearly has an ethnic meaning, but a bit special. It means fellow tribesmen. So that means that if the Pauravas call someone an Arya, it means that he is also a Paurava. If their Iranian neighbors come in contact with them, the Pauravas will call them Anarya. But the Iranians themselves call themselves Arya. In fact, the word Iran comes from Aryanam Kshatra, which means the land of the Aryans. Okay? The Hittites also call themselves Aryans, and the others non-Aryans. So, the sense of ethnic identity was very strong. In primitive societies, this is normal because there's really no one you can count on except your relatives. And so in modern society, that becomes much less. But okay, you see, back then it was like that. And so you have these Pauravas, they start the Vedic tradition. Then after a number of generations from their small statelet in northern Haryana, they greatly expand, because among the descendants there is a big imperialist, a conqueror, Sudas. So he first conquers across the Yamuna, what in the Mahabharata much later is called Panchala. And he conquers to the west, like up to the northwestern frontier. And he famously defeats the Iranians, or what is then called the Anavas, the descendants of Anu, who is a brother of Puru, in the Battle of the Ten Kings. The Battle of the Ten Kings, which was fought where? On the border of present-day India and Pakistan, on the Ravi River, which exactly forms the border. So you could say that 5,000 years ago, that was the first Indo-Pak war, won by the Indian side, of course. So then you see most of northwest India becomes their Vedic territory, and the Vedic culture expands. But the conquest stops there. And so you see in the Mahabharata that the dynasty is in trouble, there is infighting, there's a war of succession, and they don't prosper after that. In fact, even Delhi or Indraprastha, which is founded by the Pandava brothers, gets taken over by the Yadavas, the tribe of Krishna. So even though Krishna is their friend, but nevertheless, all kinds of things happen in a war, and so that territory ends up in the hands of not the enemies, the allies, but still, their territory is not exactly expanding. But no matter, because by then the Vedic tradition has acquired such a prestige that everyone else wants to be part of it. And so you have these kings in South India who offer agraharas, set apart territories with tax benefits and so on for Vedic specialists who want to come and settle there. And so that way, by about the start of the Christian era, all of the subcontinent has become Vedicized. And so the Vedic tradition will become more or less present in different groups in India. Like, for instance, the Sikhs are absolutely part of Vedic culture, and very explicitly so. In the Guru Granth, the word Veda, or all kinds of Vedic terms like Om, for instance, are used hundreds of times. You see, in Buddhism or in Jainism, this is much less the case. But Sikhism is absolutely part of it. Then the function of the Vedic tradition is that it's an overarching aegis, so to speak, for all the different Hindu traditions. Like, for example, the bhakti attitude is now predominant in Hinduism, worshipping murtis housed in mandirs. That's not Vedic. You don't find any of it in the Vedas. But nevertheless, the Vedas do create a language, a technical language and so on, which gives a place to all these practices. So that becomes the overarching identity for all the different groups within Hinduism that ultimately form Hinduism together. Okay, so the Muslims insist that they are not part of that, because you see, it's not Muhammad, it's not Allah. About Allah, you can still argue. You can say, well, Allah is only the Arabic form of Bhagwan or Ishvara or something. God is difficult to pigeonhole. But Muhammad, either there's Muhammad or there's no Muhammad. And so Hinduism doesn't have Muhammad. So you people are going to hell. I hope you like it there. Yeah. Yeah, me as an ex-Christian, I'm not going to hell. The fact that I'm an apostate from Catholicism, might make you think that I am going to hell, but that's not true. You see, I've been baptized, which means that I am protected against the doom that hits all of you, so I'm going to heaven. Now, in Belgium right now, Catholicism has become a small minority, and so it is my generation that left the church. And so I know many people around me who want to insist, I am really not a Christian anymore, and so I want the church to scrap me from their baptism registers. Now, the church says, well, we can scrap you if you really insist, but theologically it doesn't mean anything. Once baptized, always baptized. So no matter how I try, I can't escape heaven. I'm going there. And you people are going to hell, which is no big deal, at least not for you, because what is hell? You know, it's an eternal Agnihotra. You'll feel at home there. The landlord of hell, you see, which Christians call the devil, you know, he has a trident, you know. I mean, you like him. But so the Muslims are not going to hell. And that's what, you know, the meaning of Muslim versus Hindu is. But nevertheless, the word Hindustan did not undergo that same shift in meaning. It did not come to mean land of the Hindus. It simply kept on meaning India. It's only at the time of the partition that some people here and there started to use Hindustan in contrast with Pakistan. And that since Pakistan was a religious state, then Hinduism had to be the same thing but for Hindus, which is not a constitutional reality, which was also not felt like that by Hindus, and they were constantly reminded of that by the presence of the remaining Muslims. And you know, most importantly, Muslims kept calling themselves Hindustani. You know, if the Owaisi brothers go on Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, and the Arabs ask them, where are you from? They will still say, I'm from Hindustan. And there is a secular newspaper called the Hindustan Times. Now, would they have chosen that name if Hindustan meant something like Hindu Rashtra? Hindu Rashtra was the name of the paper published by Nathuram Godse, the murderer of Mahatma Gandhi. So, no, you see, the secular character of Hindustan is short. But now, what about Bhārata? In that little commotion this summer, I saw how for most Hindus, the key to Indian history is the Puranas. Now, the Puranas are a bad source. You know, I mean, looking at it as a historian, I say it's very garbled. On the one hand, it has something very good. It has the king lists. So, the history of Egypt or Mesopotamia could not have been written had there not been native king lists. But unlike in those countries, in India, historians didn't take the king list seriously. They said, yeah, but these Indians are full of, you know, fantasy and you can't take them serious. Well, no, you can see that those parts of the king list that are historically verifiable turn out to be quite realistic. Often not 100% exact, but, you know, possibly, you know, approximately. So later you get different sources, like you get Buddhist sources, Jain sources, and so on, and you can compare. You can see that those king lists, up to where they go, you know, are quite well founded, quite similar. And the special thing about the Indian king lists is that they'll go back very deep into the past. The Greeks, when they came in India after Alexander, they reported that the king lists that they found in India at that time go back to what is the equivalent of 6,776 BC. That's when Manu must have lived. I don't know how exact, but it gives an idea of the order of magnitude. So you see, I hope you have no rotten tomatoes here to throw at me, but I think Indians have been lousy historians, like you have no proper chronology, In China, from 800 BC, we know of every event, the exact date. Of every emperor, we know when he was crowned, when he died, and so on. In India, you have these manuals that say Shankara, 8th century AD, may also be 5th century BC, So that's not very good. Nevertheless, I have to praise Indian historians for getting that deep into the past. You see, that's a unique achievement, to preserve these king lists that go back so far. I mean, before too long, you can celebrate the 10,000th anniversary of Manu, So that much is there. However, you have many garbled stories. And so when you take the Vedic version of a certain story and you compare with what the Puranas have done to it, there are a few books about the Vedic rishis. One by Akshaya Prakashan and one by, I don't know, but it is by Mishra, Sadananda Mishra. What is it? From Rishihood University. The Rishis of Bhārata or something. And now both of these books, they're very useful. You can learn a lot from them. But nevertheless, they take Puranic history seriously. And they conflate it completely. Whereas the Vedic version of a story is often sharply different from the Puranic version. So, and here you see a native Hindu could probably give a lot more examples, but I can give a few. You know about the conflict between the seers Vasishtha and Vishwamitra. Now, in the Vedas, there is no conflict. They apparently never meet each other. It's not sure they even knew of each other. It's at any rate not mentioned. Maybe there's a source of conflict. You can see that for a while, Vishwamitra was the court priest of King Sudas. That's when he conquers beyond the Yamuna. Then, when he goes to conquer in the northwest, his court priest is someone else, namely Vasishtha. What happened, you see, was Vishwamitra jealous because he had been fired by Sudas, replaced with Vasishtha? Nothing at all says so. Maybe he just innocently died and had to be replaced. Who knows? That the Vedas don't say. But you see, beyond that rivalry for that job, there's, nothing that says that they had to be in conflict. Now, in the Ramayana, that story is taken up again. And so, in realistic historical terms, that must be about 1,000 years later. And there you get the story of the cow. Vasishtha has a cow, a wish cow, Kamadhenu. And so he gets as guest Vishwamitra. And so the cow provides everything that the guest needs. And Vishwamitra wants the cow. And then they have a big conflict about it. So that's something else. That's not there in the Vedas at all. Then when you come to the Puranas, By that time, the caste system has become very institutionalized. It gets a caste angle. Vasishtha is a Brahmin, and Vishwamitra wants to be a Brahmin. And then that's what their quarrel is about. Now, that's all very interesting, and that's especially interesting for a historian to learn about the evolution of Hindu society, like the rise of the caste system. But it's not history. I mean, it doesn't tell you about the historical characters, Vasishtha and Vishwamitra. So, what went wrong this summer is that everybody seems to bring in some Puranic character called Bhārata. You see, Bhārata means the descendants of, or the property of, the country of King Bhārata. Okay, but who is this Bhārata? Now, in Indian history, there are many Bhāratas, just as there are many Alexanders. And you can be sure that all Alexanders today, in America, in Russia, in Italy, wherever, are named ultimately after Alexander the Great. Well, for Indian audiences, I will not call him Alexander the Great, just Alexander of Macedon. And so similarly, these Indian Bharatas have been mostly named after the original Bharata. And why? Because it was an important man. It was someone you would want to be named after. Or someone whom fathers would choose to name their newborn sons after. So there are many Bharatas, but you see the chronology of these Bharatas is completely garbled in the Puranas. You see, two people of whom we know from the Vedas that X was the son of Y become reversed in the Puranas. And so, it's unreliable, but anyway, it seems to be very influential. There is a story of a Bharata in the Vishnu Purana, and so that is what everybody says is the original Bharata. Well, no. The original Bharata is a bit older. He stands at the beginning of the Vedas. Aha. I told you about the Paurava dynasty. And so within that Paurava dynasty, you have a whole succession of kings. And one of them is Bharata. The name Bharata has also been analyzed, but I don't know if it's that important. You see, many names in many languages have some profound meaning, but the name becomes important only because the person is important. So this Bharata became very important because of what he did, not because of the name he carried. But so as for, the meaning of the name, there I've seen different versions, even from very competent philologists. So one thing is that it means what is maintained, and that is specifically applied to the fire. Fire you have to keep burning. If you leave it alone, it gets extinguished. So that name fire is, of course, an understandable name for a society that worships fire. Bhargu, of the Rishi Bhargu, of the ancestor of the Bhargavas, that means flame. It imitates the sound of a flame. It also is explained as meaning cherished, which is a very common first name in many languages. The one who is adored, the one who is cherished, the one who is loved. Anyway, so there are a few possibilities. I prefer the one with fire. But the importance of this fellow is somewhere else, is in what he has done. Now, what has he done? You see, there are many important kings in the history of this country. You have like the conqueror, Chandragupta, who united most of India in one empire. Or you have earlier kings who did the same thing but on a smaller scale, like Kuru. But you see, no matter how powerful and no matter what great things they did, they are no match for Bhārata. Why? What did Bhārata do? Well, it is at his court that Bharadwaj, the court priest, composed the first Vedic hymn. He is associated with starting the Vedic tradition. So this court poet was Bharadwaj, who, according to the Puranas, was the adoptive son of King Bharata. But so at any rate, to start the Vedas is a unique achievement for Indian history. I mean, regardless of its religious contents, you see, the cultural results and the political results of it are enormous. You see, why does this country have a sense of unity? You know, it could very well have been fragmented like other parts of the world that have this size. You see, a person from Rajasthan and a person from Tamil Nadu and a person from Assam live literally thousands of miles away from one another. They live as far away from one another as somebody from, let's say, Nigeria from South Africa, or Mexico from Quebec, or, you know. Why do they feel they have something in common? Why do they feel they should live in one country? Well, that's because of the Vedas. You see, not every Hindu does the Vedas, recites the Vedas, understands the Vedas, but nevertheless, this is an overarching thing. You see, I compare it to children playing in a park. You see, once they are playing, they really are immersed in it. They don't see anything else. And yet there is a difference between children who are there on their own and children who are there with their mother watching in the background. You see, they are part of a bigger whole. And so in India, the Vedas are not practiced by everyone. Nevertheless, everyone is more or less aware of their presence and sees their presence alive in the practice of Brahmins and of those who employ Brahmins for their own rituals. So I don't, I have nothing with this casteism in India. I see very opposing views on caste, and even in Hindu nationalist circles, more than you'd expect, you still find people very attached to their Brahminhood or so. But nevertheless, just as a historical fact, you can't deny that Brahmins are a factor of India's unity. And so you used to have Brahmins in more or less every village in India, in every region of India at any rate. And when you saw them, you knew you were in India. It is just like, if you want casteist comparisons, well, here we go. As someone from Maharashtra explained to me, you know that Dr. Ambedkar was of the Mahar caste. So he explained to me the role of the Mahars in Maharashtrian society. like that they are the ones who arbitrate in land disputes. You see that they, in fact, they're all that untouchable that they can lay their hands on the shoulders of the two opponents and then arbitrate. You see, oh, the borderline between your lands lies here. And so his own bottom line was, well, everywhere where you have Mahars, there is Maharashtra. Okay? So you could say that everywhere where you have Brahmins, there is Bhārata. Now, what does this imply for the choice of the name Bhārata for India? So, Bhārata was initially a very small kingdom in northern Haryana. Then it became a larger kingdom in northwestern India. Then, without political or military dimension, culturally, it became a reality in all of the subcontinent. So it makes sense to call the subcontinent Bharatvarsha or just Bharata. But it means something. You see, you could say, yeah, it refers to a person, Bharata. That's, of course, true. But why? You see, when you call this country Bharata, what you effectively do is to call it Veda land. Now, I am not sure that the commotion this summer would have lasted only a few days if Narendra Modi had said, okay, you see, we invite you to this ceremony presided over by Draupadi Murmu, President of Veda land. You know, the Indian Express and the New York Times and so on would have cried scandal. Communal. So you live in an intrinsically communal country. Right. So that much for the name of India is Bharat. Now there are several other phases of India that I can deal with very briefly. The anthem. You know that before independence, the freedom fighters considered the song by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Vande Mataram, and the Muslims objected. They thought this was idolatry. This was a song for Durga, refashioned as, you know, Bharat Mata. And Nehru supported them, as he always did. And of course, Nehru was a very, you know, oblique fellow, never straight. So it's like in a chess game, you see, you have the bishop who always moves obliquely, you know, just like that. So he didn't say, oh, I oppose Vande Mataram because the Muslims don't like it. No, he said, I oppose Vande Mataram because it's too difficult to sing. Which actually happens to be fairly true. You see, I mean, I've been at many Hindu functions, and typically, in most cases, the so-called national song, that's what it became after it was not allowed to become the anthem, the national song of Vande Mataram, is sung by a professional singer, or an amateur singer, but somebody who does singing. Whereas the anthem that it became, Jana Gana Mana, that is sung by everyone. And that's, in fact, easy to sing and very pleasant to the ear. It's a very good song. So, yeah, you have to admit that. Then there was another candidate composed by Muhammad Iqbal, the spiritual father of Pakistan, who said something like, in the 30s, I mean, before independence, before partition. It went like Sare Jahan Se Acha, Hindustan Hamara. So of the whole world, the best is our India. Which is, which is a very supremacist thing to say. Some people think that in Germany, the anthem Deutschland über alles, indicates the imperialism and so on of the Germans, that they put themselves above everyone else. Now, that's not the meaning. You see, in the time of German unification, when this song was composed, well, there was a poem composed, and then there was an existing melody, which was the melody of the anthem of the Austrian Empire. And so to emphasize that they were the counter force against the empire, the Republicans took that melody and put their own poem as lyrics on it. And so the meaning of it was, you should not think of the Rhineland or Bavaria or Prussia or so. No, you see, all these regional loyalties are old-fashioned. You should throw in your lot together with Germany. So it says nothing at all about the non-German parts of the world. However, in this case, Iqbal does say that India is the best of the world. Anyway, I mean, we can analyze that, but it's historically no longer important, because once he became the father of partition, then that song was not viable anymore, even though Nehru would have liked it because it was in Urdu and that was his language. But it became then a song by Rabindranath Tagore, who is the author of 3 anthems, or at least of 3 melodies and of the lyrics of 2 of them. He's also the author of the Sri Lankan anthem's melody, but not of the lyrics. But he's the author of the Bangladeshi as well as the Indian anthem. And so he, you all know the words, I suppose. It's about the Jana Gana Mana Adhinayak, the commander of the people's minds, and about the Bhārata Bhagya Vidhata, about the dispenser of India's destiny. Now, who is this? Because you see, I always see these choirs, all these girls singing about Bhārata Bhagya Vidhata. And I wonder, do they realize what they are singing? Well, the song was first performed in 1911, a few days before the visit to India of the King Emperor, that is to say the King of England, who was also the Emperor of India, King George the Fifth. And it was a meeting of Congress devoted precisely to preparing a proper reception of the king. Now, at that time, Congress was not pursuing independence. You see, the most ambitious thing that they considered was dominion status, the same as Canada and Australia. And so, yeah, they would honor the king. Why not? And there was another song in Urdu that effectively praised King George. That was also performed at that meeting. And so then came Tagore's song. And so the British Indian press, like the Statesman in Kolkata, reported, you see, that, songs have been performed in praise of our king. Now, Tagore didn't see it that way, and in a letter to a friend, he explained the situation. He says, "Oh no, you see, I would never, I'm all for independence, and so I would not write a song in praise of King George." So the dispenser of India's destiny is not meant to be King George. After independence, when it became the anthem, many people thought, oh, this is in favor of Nehru. And you see, the Indian people had not very much experience of democracy. Nowadays, I see that Narendra Modi has these posters, the mother of democracy, and so on. It's a complicated picture. At the village level, there has been some kind of democracy. There have been republics in ancient India. They were not democratic in the modern sense. Like the Buddha came from the Shakya Republic, but the Shakya Republic was effectively ruled by the Kshatriyas among the Shakyas. And he was part of like the Senate since his 20 years or so. And so, there was an oligarchy. And the common people could attend the meetings, they could look at what is being discussed, but they couldn't intervene. It's like in modern parliaments, you have, upstairs, people can come, journalists who have to do their job or anyone else, and watch the proceedings, but they can't intervene. They're not allowed to say anything. So, is that democracy? Yeah, I mean, it's a good attempt. It has checks and balances. It's not autocracy. To say democracy, yeah, partly yes, partly no. Anyway, so you see, after independence, people went to vote for the first time for a real parliament. They had already a few very limited attempts under British rule. And so Nehru was, the winner, hands down. I was at a conference a few months ago about Mahatma Gandhi. And you see, most of the people there were Gandhians. They were still thinking that, Gandhi gave India independence and all these myths. Well, so I said, there are a few bad things that Gandhi has done for India. And maybe the most consequential, you see, partition was bad enough with its attendant killings of a few millions and 10 million refugees or so. That was bad enough. But one is perhaps even worse in the long term. It is that he foisted Nehru on India. Because as you may know the story, Nehru was one candidate for the Congress presidency just before independence, which meant becoming the prime minister upon independence. And so the other candidate was Sardar Patel. Now, this was a vote within the Congress committee, and the vote was 0 votes for Nehru and most of the votes for Patel. So it is Gandhi who persuaded Patel to withdraw his candidacy. So he had won. He should have been the Prime Minister of India, but he withdrew his candidacy. So that Nehru, with 0 votes, got elected. And then, so I said, you see, Nehru had no democratic legitimacy. Then there was some secularist scholar, Ananya, what's her name, Ananya Vajpayee, who from this secularist Ashoka University, I think, who said, yeah, but he had a very comfortable majority in the first general elections. Yes, he had a democratic legitimacy, Well, no. Had Sardar Patel been there, he would just as well have received all these votes. Or had anybody else been there. You see, the people voted for the man in power. You know, they look up to somebody who has that pride of place. You see, to get there, you have to be somebody important. And there's nobody who can stand against him. Anyway, that's a little detour I had to make because I like to put Nehru in his place. So it is not Nehru who was addressed as the Bhārata Bhāgya Vidhāta. So who was it? Now remember that the Muslims had opposed Vande Mataram because it was idolatrous. You know, it worshipped the Hindu goddess. Okay. Well, you won't see it in the first stanza, the only one that is the official anthem. And the second stanza might completely put you on the wrong foot because it says that Hindus and Muslims and Parsis and Sikhs and Christians, everybody, they hail you, you know. So you might think, oh, this is a secularist anthem. Now, among other things, this bringing all religions together is a typically Hindu thing to do. You see, Muslims or Christians don't want that. You know, they don't see any equality between their own religion and others. But more importantly, you see, that line is there in the text, but it doesn't say who the Bhārata Bhāgya Vidhāta is. For that, you have to go to the third stanza. And there, suddenly everything becomes clear. Because the Bhārata Bhāgya Vidhāta is described as the eternal charioteer. You see, who yuge yuge, you know, from age to age comes, you know, to lift us up and so on. But that's exactly the theory of the, you know, Avatarvad. You know, that's what is explained by Krishna in the Gita, that, you know, every time when Dharma falters, I come to restore Dharma. And so that's associated with Vishnu because Vishnu is the maintainer. Just as Shiva is the destroyer, Brahma is the creator. But you see, when Dharma has to be maintained, has to be kept up, you know, that's Vishnu, and so you get these incarnations of Vishnu. So, this is the Bhārata Bhāgya Vidhāta, Krishna. So, you see, if I were a Muslim who would actually read the anthem till the end, I'd object to it. I would say this is idolatrous. You know, Nehru freed us from this ugly, vicious, idolatrous Vande Mataram. And now we got this, which is just as bad. Yeah. Then there is the flag. There have been a number of flags proposed in the decades before independence. Like one was the sun and the moon as the two principles, the male and the female and so on. Then you have a number of variations on the tricolor. Mahatma Gandhi at one point proposed the tricolor, but with in one corner the Union Jack, the flag of Great Britain. Because ultimately he was a British loyalist. You see, Purna Swaraj was not his idea. He was already an old man when Purna Swaraj was proposed and accepted by Congress. So before that, home rule, you know, within the British Empire was already something. And that's exactly what he preferred, because he was a British loyalist. In 3 wars, he has risked his life for the British, for the empire. 2 of them in South Africa, and then the First World War. You see, in the Second World War, he reprimanded Savarkar for recruiting soldiers for the British war effort. Now, he himself had done exactly the same in the First World War. And so, you see, I mean, I am from Flanders fields, where there are many, graveyards with Indian soldiers who were fighting for the empire against a German army that had never done India any harm. So it was a very foolish war, and indeed, in the Second World War, you could still say it was about something. And in fact, both sides thought so. The Stalinist side said, we have to stop the Nazis. But on the Nazi side, we have to stop godless communism. So everybody thought this was a war of life and death, whereas this First World War was a total waste. And that's what Gandhi recruited for. Anyway. So he was a British loyalist. He wanted to put the Union Jack in there. That didn't happen. The spinning wheel, that was also an idea of his, that also didn't make it. You see, Nehru always did the needful to stay friends with Gandhi, but of course secretly thought what most modern people think about Gandhi. So he didn't believe in the spinning wheel, but he put in another wheel. Now, when you read his writings about it, he says that it is in honor of Ashoka, because a few decades before, British archaeologists had discovered some, pieces of Ashokan rule, including this this symbol with the lions and the wheel. And so the wheel is the symbol of the Chakravarti, the wheel turner, meaning the universal monarch. And so he identified that with Ashoka. Well, he was mistaken. Nehru was a prototypical secularist in that he didn't understand the ABC of religion. You see, people who themselves have no feeling for what religion means, what it does to you, they will only understand religion if they make a really very conscious effort to do so. And he never did. Because he thought religion is old-fashioned, we have to do with it anyway, so he didn't spend his time on it. And Ashoka himself was also a British, discovery, because the native Indian, sense of history didn't have a place for Ashoka. And in fact, they didn't like Ashoka. And so, for instance, in Kalinga, you see supposedly the massacre where, that made Ashoka convert to Buddhism, which is a very Christian story. He was struck with remorse, and then as a result he converted, he got religion, which is incidentally historically not true. Ashoka was already a Buddhist before that. But so, you see, the British made a lot of it. And so Nehru, who had no other horizon about Indian history than precisely what the British had produced, took that over, and so he also idealized Ashoka. But you see, that wheel symbol is not typical for Ashoka. That's an expression of the doctrine of the Chakravarti. Now, the Chakravarti is a Hindu political ideal, meaning that this cultural unit of the subcontinent, you see, should acquire some form of political unity. Now, it's not really a state, an empire in the modern sense. It was too big for that, with the limited traffic possibilities and so on in those days. But at least it should have, for the important things like foreign policy, military, it should have a unified will behind it. And so that ideal was there. You already find it in the Mahabharata, where a number of ancient kings, including Bhārata, are described as Chakravarti. Now, maybe that title didn't exist yet in these old days. That was back projected by the Mahabharata writers. But still, it was a Hindu ideal, and Ashoka came to fill that slot. So he meant to degrade, to insult Hinduism by preferring Ashoka to the ugly, vicious Hindus. But in fact, he put a Hindu symbol par excellence in the flag. So we have to thank Nehru for that. And as for the colors, of course, many Hindus had wanted the color to be just saffron. Well, orange is not really saffron, but you know, the term saffron is used all the time. And yeah, why not? You see, under Gaddafi, Muammar al-Gaddafi, the flag of Libya was, anybody who knows? The flag of Libya was green. Nothing else. Not even the Shahada written into it, La ilaha illallah, no, nothing. Green. And I think that's a good idea. And so for him also, that greenery had two different meanings. One was Islam, but the other was simply the natural meaning of green, namely nature, vegetation. And that's very much tied up with the policy that he was pursuing, namely to make the desert green. And so there were all kinds of public works in Libya to pump up water from underground lakes, so to speak. And, you know, before the Americans messed it all up, Libya was making great progress in this regard. So, you see, and this is something that Madhu Kishwar told me, that, you know, we really shouldn't give up on green just because it has been captured by Islam. It has a natural meaning of nature, and we should restore that meaning. So, to put green below and orange above can simply be seen as, you see, you have the green earth below, you have the starry sky above, the sun and everything that gives light, saffron. So that's a good symbolism. And even in a communal sense, which is what Nehru meant, he meant to also give a place to Islam. But even in that sense, well, it gives what Vivekananda formulated as Vedanta brain, Islamic body. And that's Vivekananda's expression. He believed that this was the future. You know, Islamic body, Vedanta brain. So Vedanta above and Islam below. That's how it has worked out. So that's okay. You know, you can perfectly be proud of your flag. Nathuram Godse told Savarkar, his mentor, yeah, but you can't accept this bloody Nehruvian flag. And so Savarkar said, well, yes, this is now India's flag. You know, we should swear allegiance to it. Yeah. Then a final thing I want to mention in the last 2 minutes is something that is constantly used as a symbol of India, even by people who don't know what the flag is of India or the anthem, namely the elephant. You see, the elephant was the mount of Indra, who is the main god in the Vedas. Then there is, of course, the Puranic story that everybody knows about how Ganesha acquired an elephant head. So the story is that Ganesha was, guarding the door when his mother was bathing, and so his father came there, and he wanted to be let in, and Ganesha had orders not to let anyone in, not even, the woman's husband. And so he got angry and he chopped off his head. Then later he said, "What have I done?" And so to make up for it as much as possible, he put an elephant's head there. According to Narendra Modi, it was by means of plastic surgery. Now, of course, that's only a Puranic story, The thing is that the elephant was already the main god for Indians since ever there were human beings in India. It's very sure that when you come into India and you see these elephants roaming around, you have to be impressed with them. And as Krishna says in the Gita, you can worship anything that impresses you. So it's there. And you see its primacy of place. You already saw it with him being associated with Indra, the upper god. But here also, Ganesha, what does it mean? Ganesha or Ganapati means the Lord of Gana. Now, what is Gana? You have a derived word Ganita, meaning arithmetic. So it means number. It also means group, like in Vedic theology, if I may use that word. There is talk of the Deva Gana, the category of Deva gods, the Asura Gana, the Arbhu Gana, the what are they called again? This wild horde around Rudra, young warriors. No, yeah, that's not it. Rudra is surrounded by a number of young warriors. What are they called? Hey. Huh? Please speak louder because I'm hard of hearing. Hmm? No, I can't think of it. Of what I understand of your saying, I don't recognize it. Anyway, I mean, all I want to say is every category of divine beings is called a Gana. So Gana means number and group. It in fact signifies a concept known from modern mathematics, from set theory. If you have had some good mathematical education, you will recognize it. A cardinal number. The number that characterizes a group. If there's 4 elements in the group, the cardinal number is 4. Okay? So the cardinal number of the Aditya Gana is 12. There are 12 heavenly gods. And the number of the Rudra Gana is 11, because there are 11 atmospheric gods. And the Vasu Gana, there are 8 earthly gods. So Ganesha means the Lord of groups, of these groups. So effectively it means the God of gods. That's why he's the first one to address. And so here again you have the total centrality of the elephant. You see, there's no imagery that goes beyond the elephant. The elephant is the biggest, is the most central. And so it is a very happy coincidence that everybody uses elephant imagery for India. So in the 90s, when in strange parallel, both India and China were relinquishing the socialist model, you had cartoons in Western papers of, a dragon and an elephant walking hand in hand to the supermarket and, filling their little carriage, which they couldn't do earlier, but now, with liberalization, you see, they become prosperous and so on. So anyway, I mean, without thinking, you see, everybody uses the elephant as the symbol of India, just as the bear is the symbol of Russia. So that, can conclude our little overview of the different faces of India. And now I kept you waiting a long time, to listen to what I had to say. Now I want to listen to you. By the way, I hope this clock in the back is right.
Yes.
Okay, because, I was thinking, it's less than 2 hours, but maybe I was being deceived. Okay.
Now we are coming to the concluding part of this lecture. It was really a thought-provoking lecture of 90 plus minutes. And Dr. Elst, I heard his name first time in 1992 after the demolition of the controversial building in Ayodhya. A famous scholar, thinker, and social activist, Sri H.V. Sheshadri, he used to mention Dr. Elst's name in his lectures regarding the demolition of the controversial building called Babri Masjid. At that time, so many people spoke about that incident in so many ways. Dr. Elst said, India or Bharat has started to think in its own way. I think I am correct at this thing. Afterwards, we are very happy and very, very proud. We could able to listen his lectures directly. Last year also, when he came to Bangalore, he had delivered a lecture in Mythic Society. Tomorrow also we are going to record one of his interviews in Mythic Society. And as already Sri Venkatesh mentioned it, it is the 41st time he is coming to Bangalore. Even though he is from Belgium, his contact and his interaction with Indians, it is enormous. And in today's lecture, he sufficiently thrown light on different names of Bharat, its importance, and his understanding about the Hinduism and Bharat is very commendable. He really deserves to be, we have to appreciate his knowledge about India and Bharatiya knowledge. And he said Bharat can be called in different names: Bharat, India, Hindustan, Jambudvipa, and land of Vedas. And he said one more important thing, that Buddha was a Buddhist before Kalinga War. Ashoka was a Buddhist before Kalinga War itself. Normally what is the general thinking is Ashoka became Buddhist after the Kalinga War. That is not true. And he, national anthem, regarding the national anthem also he has given, thrown sufficient light on that. I want to mention here 2 points. One is, Rabindranath Tagore said, I have not written this in praising King George V. At the same time, he analyzed it in another way, which we never thought of. Bhārata Bhagya Vidata really is Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna is the Bhārata Bhagya Vidata. It's a very good this thing. I appreciate Dr. Elst for this. Like this, today, Dr. Elst has enlightened us about our own things. Even though he's a foreigner, he enlightened us about our own Indian things. ಭಾರತೀಯ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸಂಗತಿಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನು ಹೆಚ್ಚಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತಲೇ ಹೇಳಬೇಕು. ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಮಿಥಿಕ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿಯ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್ ಮತ್ತು ಮಿಷನ್ ದಿಶಾ ಮತ್ತು ಪ್ರಜ್ಞಾ ಪ್ರವಾಹ ಈ 4 ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳು ಸೇರಿ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡ್ವಿ. ಈ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಅನಂತ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ಅರ್ಪಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. Dr. Elst, we conducted the lecture by coming together the 4 institutes, Indian Institute of Science, the Indian Institute of World Culture, the Mythic Society, Mission Disha and Pragna Pravaha. And we are very much thankful to you, and we propose a vote of thanks on all these, on behalf of all these entities. Thank you very much for your enlightening lecture. May I request Sri Venkatesh to present the token of Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the thanks for you all the audience to make it the time in the Saturday morning and attend and grace the function. Thank you.
Well, I remembered what that category of gods is, the Marutas, after whom a car has been named. Yeah. They are the wild horde around Rudra. Oh, yeah.
I have one question to you, sir.
Yeah?
When you are referring the Vedic literature while defining different aspects of India and Bharat,
Yeah.
With your research and with your findings,
Why don't you pose the question from here so that others can also hear if they want?
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Elst, for your insight. It's very useful. My question is, while you are analyzing the different facets of Bharata and India, based on your research, what's the where you define the Vedic literature timelines, which is the key reference for defining these different aspects of Bharata, and what's the timeline based on your research? That's one question. Sub-question to it: what reference you provide to define the Vedic timelines in your research work? Thank you.
Well, in this case, you see, the timeline is not that important, in the sense that if you have relative history, you know what comes first, what comes later. That's already good enough for the present purpose. However, we have an approximative timeline, which is getting better and better. And